Have you ever wondered why adult Japanese visual novels have to be censored with mosaics all the time? I was reading through a new English version of Fate Stay Night recently, and while both of the translations are pretty shit, it's still a damn good VN. But this English version has welcome quality of life improvements for minor things that you can tweak to your liking. For example, textual context, music, and the one I would like to talk about, censorship. You get 4 options, but at the bottom, you get to choose an option for decensoring the hentai CGs if you want to. I chose the 3rd option for my playthrough as the mosaics are pretty shit. But this got me wondering, that question I asked at the beginning of this video. I mean, yes, all Japanese pornography is censored, and it has a simple answer when you get down to it: the law. Article 175 of the Penal Code of Japan outlaws so-called obscene content, which includes male and female genitalia. However, even though this law has been kept unchanged since 1907, when it was first introduced, eroge from, say, the 1980s and very early 90s usually didn't have any sort of censorship applied to them. This was the norm until 1991, when the Saori Incident occurred. There, the mystery was solved. Although, what was the Saori Incident all about? I only knew the basics, and the incident is often noted as a massive shift to the Bishoujo/eroge industry. I've heard it mentioned a few times in other videos, and I even gave a little rundown on it in my previous video, though not to a good extent in my opinion. So I, of course, had to look into it. I'm hoping this video is as accurate as possible, as I couldn't find too many sources, but they were all quite helpful. Also, there are many Japanese names in this video that I'm probably going to butcher. Anyway, without further ado, let's see what that Saori incident was all about in its entirety. Of course, we must start in the early 1980s, when the Japanese eroge genre began on 8-bit computers. This time was like the Wild West when it came to eroge, like the Western computer market at the time, for literally any game ever made. One of the first eroge, or rather Bishoujo game, which roughly translates to gal game, was Nightlife in 1982, created by Koei, which was marketed as an aid for sexually active couples. The graphics were simple black and white outlines, which look rather crude. After Nightlife, many other publishers started creating their own spin on the Bishoujo genre, like Falcom and Enix. These titles usually had female characters drawn in a super deformed children's style, which in modern terms would be called lolis. Of course, this wasn't something that only happened in eroge, as the first hentai animes that were released around the time were also drawn in the same way, like Cream Lemon. In 1985, JAST released Tenshi-tachi no Gogo, which was a precursor to the modern dating sim, and instead of lolis, the girls were drawn, well, normally. Well, anyway, more and more Bishoujo and eroge were released over the 1980s, some based fully on the sexual content, and some were just there for shock value. The Bishoujo genre was small in those days, mainly developed by teams of small independent developers. It slowly began to change come the turn of the decade. JST, established in 1985, was possibly the first truly big Bishoujo publisher. Some employees from JST would later on become independent after they worked there. For example, Kirara, which formed their own company in 1987 and made the Fairy Tail brand the same year. Cocktail Soft was originally made in collaboration between JST and Kirara in 1989. In 1988, Masato Hiruta, who wrote the scenario for Fairy Tail's Lipstick Adventure, formed his own company with other Fairy Tail staff and became independent in 1989. That company would become ELF. This is just a small piece of the massive cobweb that was the connections and spawning off of brands and companies in the Bishoujo industry. There are simply too many to list. At the turn of the decade, Bishoujo was possibly not even a genre anymore. Instead, it was a full industry. This new Bishoujo industry was rapidly expanding year after year, but there were some bumps in the road in the 1980s. The game 177, which was released in 1986, is a very famous example of a controversial game from Japanese computers at the time. Hell, it's probably even more well-known in the West compared to the Saori Incident. However, 177 is a lesser-known title in the grand scheme of controversial video games. 177 was a simple game composed of 2 parts. The first part has you chasing a woman in the forest, trying to make sure you don't run out of time by taking clothes off the woman. After you beat that part, you go into the second part of the game, where you have to rape the woman in an attempt to bring pleasure so you can get the so-called good ending. Also, 177 in the title refers to Article 177 of the Penal Code of Japan, which is on forcible sexual intercourse. While the game is somewhat tame compared to modern-day standards, it caused a great deal of controversy in 1986, so much so that it was discussed at the National Diet, which led the game to be recalled and edited to remove some of the more graphic material seen in the game. This incident was probably the first time the small Bishoujo market was exposed out to the mainstream, but this game didn't seem to cause that much of a scene in comparison to Saori. In 1988 and 1989, a man who I've refused to state his name, dubbed the Otaku Killer, abducted 4 young girls, aged 4 to 7, and killed them. Not only that, but he also molested the corpses of his victims and committed cannibalism. He was arrested in July of 1989, and when his house was raided by police, over 6,000 videotapes were found along with anime merchandise and manga. Around 50 of the videotapes contained illegal material, like footage and photos of his victims. This led to a terrible moral panic against manga, anime, and literally anything that was somewhat directly related to them, as this was an initiative to regulate that media somehow. Also in 1990, one of the largest newspapers in Japan, Asahi Shimbun, basically stated in an editorial that manga asserts harmful influence, and the Protect Children from Comic Books Association was formed to call to action restricting books and so-called harmful material, such as manga and anime. And this brings us to Saori. Saori was released on October 18th of 1991 on the PC-98, and then later the X60,000, by Fairytale Ekshitai, which was a brand under Fairytale, which was a brand under Kirawa at this time. Getting confused? By the way, Ekshitai is partly referring to the MPAA's X rating that was used for the most obscene and violent films that were rated at the time in America until 1990. The game follows Saori, who watches a couple have sex in a park. So she goes to masturbate and then has a dream in which sexual hijinks ensue. That's it. That's the game. Nothing truly stood out about the game compared to literally any other Bishoujo at the time, just another new Kige game with the only thing going for it being the music. This is probably the shortest damn overview I've given a game yet on this channel. Now the incident occurred shortly after the game's release, but the exact date is unknown. I'm sure quite a few of you know how it all went, but I'm going to restate it again anyways. In the Kyoto Prefecture, a young middle school boy shoplifted a copy of Saori and then was later arrested. More details on the actual happenings, such as the times and the name of the kid who did it, are unknown due to the juvenile law in Japan, but it does not matter. It is also unknown if the kid was directly trying to get a porn game or if he just got the game at random. Anyways, since the kid stole Saori in particular, this of course led to more public outcry to fuel the fire that was the increase in pushback against so-called obscene manga and anime. So on November 25th, 1981, the Kyoto Prefectural Police Juvenile Division appeared at the Tokyo offices of GAST in Kirawa with a search warrant. The investigators seized around 300 copies of evidence and arrested 3 people, including representatives of the companies, on charges of possessing and selling obscene content. Those representatives received a sentence of 1 year in prison. Also, it was stated in the news at the time that 5 manufacturing and sales companies in Tokyo were raided by police. However, the other 3 companies are unknown, or if it was a mistake by the press. Shortly after the incident, Kirawa renamed their company to IDES, and the Ekshitai brand was discontinued for a few years, but its successor Fairytale Red Zone, which launched in 1993 after the incident was over. JST, Fairytale, and many other major Bishoujo brands, including Alisoft and Elf, released a statement that roughly translates to, "We do not want to treat women as objects of sexual desire, but to depict the love between humans with an enhanced story and graphics." It was unknown what would happen after this incident, which forced some companies like Elf to begin pulling the adult versions of their recently released titles and instead create censored all-ages versions as to not be put in the crosshairs of more law enforcement. Also, I don't know where I got this, but in an interview from Hiruda, which I think was based on Dokusei, the Saori incident prompted Dragon Knight 4 to be delayed from its original 1992 release to 1994. The issue prompted the head of Alisoft, Tada, to beg the chairman of the Software Association of Japan to do something. This resulted in a meeting on August 25th, 1992, held by representatives of many Bishoujo companies, including 16 software houses, 7 distributors, and 2 publishers, where opinions were discussed. The companies who joined the meeting included Elf, Fairytale, Alisoft, Gainax, and Himiasoft. This brings us to the formation of the Ethics Organization of Computer Software, also known as Sofurin. Sofurin was formed on October 27, 1992, and prepared for companies to opt in for membership. On the surface, this seems like a great way to have the industry regulate itself well enough. However, even at the time, Sofurin was criticized heavily for its bizarre requirements for membership and their guidelines. For example, limiting depictions of LGBTQ+ content, BDSM, and more. Along with that, there were also requirements for mosaics to be included for censorship, which is why everyone immediately began to adopt censorship around the time. Others had just an invisible penis, and some had the genitalia be as bright as the sun. These changes are still felt today in Japan, as nothing has changed in the way of pornographic content since 1907, when the penal code was first put into effect. Sofurin still exists to this day, so if you buy any eroge physically from Japan, you can still usually see the Sofurin sticker somewhere on the box. Also, yes, Sarah was formed in 2002, but that is for console games, not PC gaming, and the two are practically different markets in Japan. As I said before, Kirawa rebranded, but that wasn't the end for them. After Sohori, it seemed like they wanted to apologize to the people for creating the game, and began experimenting in 1992. In that year, they released an all-ages game called Shinjuku Monogatari, which was led by the staff of Sohori, and began their horror trilogy called Nightmare Collection, which included the Dead of the Brain games and Rain Fight, and later on its successor, the hardcover titles. Sohori also directly led to the formation of Muse, a sound team led by Akira Saito. Originally, composers at EYES and other companies that the sound unit composed for were credited either under aliases or their full name. After Sohori, Muse was formed to make sure if another Sohori occurred, they could maintain plausible deniability for the composers. Now you may be wondering, why exactly the composers? According to the late Hironari Tadokuro in his memoirs, Ishuno Yoshitani, also known as Panda, who was the sound producer for Sohori, left the company to form his own, Cat's Pro, due to the incident. Anyways, EYES rebranded to F&C, meaning Fairytale and Cocktail Soft, and are still active to today. As for JST, they kept developing and publishing games after the change in leadership, but went bankrupt in 2001. JST USA still exists, though, as a publisher for translated eroge in Western markets. Well, I think that's everything on the Sohori incident. However, just one more thing. Recently, more and more eroge has been released in the West, and along with that, many titles have had the mosaics in the explicit CGs removed. However, it's odd to have them removed because really, the original developers didn't bother to even draw the art under the mosaics. After all, it's just going to be censored anyways. This causes a lot of de-mosaic art to look off, like I said earlier with Fate Stay Night. Most of the time, there's really no option at all to have the original art, which sucks. But some of the de-mosaics do look great, like the ones in the Western Alisoft releases, and also the English Himiasoft releases for Caesar games. However, I would honestly prefer to have the original art not be tampered with just to take advantage of the more lax regulations on sexual content in Western markets. But I guess that's just my opinion. Anyways, thank you for watching. Again, if I got anything wrong, please tell me in the comments. Bash my video or something, I don't really care. I'd like to thank JackDBS and trentsignia for finding most of the sources I used in this video. And all of the sources I got from this video are going to be in the description so you can read up on them. And also some books with more information on the Japanese eroge industry. However, they all are in Japanese, so I didn't really use them. Also, they cost money. And also a video from Emily Dori, which came out around a year ago and has a short segment that I used some information from, and actually it was originally how I found out of the Sohori incident. Thank you so much for the support on this channel. Recently I got 400 subscribers, which is amazing. I'm probably going to do a stream of some Doom WOD in the coming weeks, which is going to be absolutely terrible. It's probably going to be very taxing on my mental state because the WOD is awful. But thank you for watching the video. More review content is going to come, but it's taken a while because I am a very lazy bastard. Well, see ya.